This is a nice one. I don't even know what it is. Let me do. Love's Magic. It's Liebesauer. They changed the name. This is a good one because it's got great roots. Okay? All right. You're welcome to ask any questions you have while I'm doing this. I'll try my best to answer them. I don't know the answer. Sometimes I make something up. But you'll believe me. Because I've got this tag on here. I'm with Santa Barbara Rose Society, and we have some members up here, and they've got information that we'd love to have you take home with you. It might help you remember how to prune roses when you get home. And there's information about the Rose Society and rose tips, and we'll be doing this at Rose Society on Thursday night at the Lutheran Church.
When the refreshments get
So about 7:30 we start the demo. So if you don't get it all today, you can come back and hear us again. This is what your roses should look like right now. This is a hybrid tea, and it's called Sugar Moon. And we're actually putting in a whole bed of these at the Postel Garden across from the Mission because I like it so well. And why do I like it so well? If you look at your roses in your own garden right now, you're going to notice that they have mottled leaves, powdery mildew. A lot of rust is running around right now. Look at this rose. Look at these leaves. I'm sure they haven't been spraying their roses, right? Right. So there's no fungicide on this rose. And look at the leaves. They're gorgeous. So this tells you this is a really good rose. You want it. And then you look a little deeper and you realize that maybe it's taller than I want. Maybe it's, the blooms are smaller than I want. Maybe it doesn't bloom enough. If you look at this, you'll notice there's one flower at the end of each stem. This is called Sugar Moon. It's a really good hybrid tea. It's very, very, very fragrant, and it's pure white. The blooms aren't as big as I would like them to be. I want them to be 5 or 6 inches, and this is more like 4 in diameter. The fact that it doesn't spray at all disappoints me because that means every time I have a bloom, I have to have a whole stem grow before I get one. Okay? So you can see that there's, maybe there's a dozen blooms on this rose. But that's a lot of growth to get a dozen growth. So it depends what's important for you. This is really a disease-resistant rose, however. It's vigorous and it's very, very fragrant. And those are the reasons that I decided to put 60 of them in the Postel Garden in the next couple of weeks. So I like the rose, but I don't have it at my house. Okay. Why do we prune roses? Does anybody know why we prune roses? Pardon? Well, the rest is over. The rest started ideally November 1st is the time you just leave your roses alone. You don't cut them. And you see they didn't. You see the blooms at the top, they're dried up, but they left them on. And that sort of signals the rose to stop growing. So it gives it a forced rest. You know what a rose hip is. It's what you make rose hip tea out of. There's seeds inside that round ball. Some roses are sterile, so they don't form a hip. This is a rose that is sterile, so we don't have any hips on it. But a lot of roses will just, the pod will swell up, it'll turn yellow, orange, red, and it helps to get the rose to rest. We don't have a dormancy period in Santa Barbara because our weather is too nice. If you were in a colder climate, the roses, they stop because it's cold. So here we have to force them to rest. So that's why I say, leave your roses alone after November 1st. And now we're going to break that dormancy, that rest period, because once we cut them, the rest is over because they immediately start growing. Okay? So that's one of the reasons we prune our roses. We prune them to shape them. We prune them to, most importantly, to encourage new growth. So when we cut on these roses, they're going to start growing, and we're hoping that we get some of that growth from down here. This is what we call the crown. Okay? That's where the graft is. For you who might be interested, roses are, when you get one of these bare root roses, you're getting two plants. You're getting a rootstock plant, which is called Dr. Huey, and then you're getting, in this case, Love's Magic on top. And then they stick them together. And they grow this one underground because it likes cool, moist conditions, and they grow this one above ground to bloom, give you the flowers that you're looking. It likes dry, hot conditions. Okay? So you're pruning to encourage new growth from this crown. And what do we prune? What do we get rid of? Why? What are we trying to leave, and what do we want to keep? Well, this is a fairly young rose. You can tell because it doesn't have much old growth on it. You'll notice that the canes, and when I talk about canes, I'm talking about anything that comes right off of the crown. These, which are what you're hoping to get, and this particular rose had one really beautiful one right in the center. You can see the size of the diameter on this cane. That's really what you want. You want 3, 5 to 7 of these large diameter canes. You don't always get it. And in the case of this particular rose bush, they didn't get it. They got a lot of growth, but they're smaller than I would like. And it's hopefully smaller than you have at home. And a young rose is very vigorous when it's young, kind of like we are. And then as it ages, it becomes less vigorous. So you don't, at the beginning, you get a lot of big canes, and then as it ages, it's harder and harder for them to push out. So you have to prune out the old ones, so the energy that is in that rose pushes out new ones. So you have to make room for new ones. And so you have to know what are the old ones that you want to get rid of. And this one's a tough one because it's a young rose. There isn't much on it that's old. And when you look at your own roses, you're going to find lots of old, most likely. And I'm going to tell you how to tell what's old. These are young because they're deep colored. This particular rose tends to have mahogany canes. Anything that comes off of a cane is a lateral. So you can have first laterals, second laterals, third laterals. They just keep going up. And you'll notice they keep getting smaller in diameter as they go up. And the smaller the diameter, the less bloom they're going to hold. So when you have all these little ones, you know you don't want to keep them. You want to keep the heavier ones. And you want to keep the bright colored ones. And as they age, the first thing that changes color are the thorns. You can see that there's one cane here that's older, and you see the thorns on it, they're gray, just like wheat do. And then eventually, you can see a little bit of it on here, they start to striate gray. And you can see on the crown where one of the older canes still has a stub, it's completely gray. And there's nothing coming off of that anymore. It doesn't have any strength. So when they get to the point that they're very gray, and you have a number of new ones, that's easy to say, let's get rid of that old one. Okay? All right. If it doesn't make sense to you, please, yell at me. And I'll try to get it to make sense. So I'm going to get rid of a little bit of the top so I can see what I have to do. And so I'm going to do just some cutting that way. My shear is sticking. Okay. Oh, and by the way, get yourself I didn't even talk about this. It's really important to have the right tools. This is a number 13 Felco. For pruning, it's my favorite, but it takes a big hand. I've got pretty good sized hands. They have, the standard Felco is a number 2. They have a number 8, which has a smaller handle for smaller hands. And they're not cheap. This is $69.
Ouch.
But I've had this one for, I don't know, a decade at least. And the only reason I get new ones is because I occasionally lose them. But you can even break the blades, and they have replacement blades here. So it's a great idea to invest in a good shear. And you want to have a slicing shear, not an anvil shear. You'll see that some shears have a flat top here, and the blade comes down and hits the flat area, and that will crush your canes. So you want something that slices through. Does that make sense? So use a shear that slices through, and then get a little stone of some sort and keep it sharp. And if you're smart, like I am today, you'll oil it so it's smoother for you.
Where do you get the stones?
Oh, you get everything right here at Lawson.
Do all roses you prune the same way?
No, you don't. But let me finish this one and I'll talk about some others. I'm going to do some cutting, as I started to do. And I just like to cut. I don't like to think too much, otherwise it takes too long to prune. And I do like to have my cuts at different heights. Not the first time we've had an argument. Okay, when you make your cuts, you always want to cut on an angle, and you want to cut away from the leaf that you're cutting above, or the bud that you're cutting above. So, here's one that I just cut. You have to take all the leaves off, by the way. So, and they come off easy, and you can't cut them off, you have to pull them off. And you'll notice there's how easy it is to see the buds on this. You can see that bright green? That's going to be a bud is right there, and the first set of leaves are going to come from the top because the energy comes through this rose and goes all the way to the top and pushes out the new leaf. So that's what it's going to do. That's the first place it's going to sprout, on all of them. And I cut it on an angle for a reason. This, let's see if I've got it. can't see really well on this, but if you let them sit for a few minutes, you'll see that they're going to get shiny from the sap, okay? And if the sap drips, you want it to drip away from the bud. And also, if it rains, like it is now, right after you prune, you want the water to run off so it doesn't rot. If you cut it straight across, the water will sit on top, and it'll rot down into the cane, okay? So, cut on an angle. We used to talk about sealing our cuts with, we used to use tar when I was a little kid, back in the 50s, and now we use Elmer's glue, because it's water soluble and it's not ugly and it washes away. I don't use anything. The reason for sealing your canes is because of cane borers. It's a little wasp that digs down into the soft. There's two layers on your road. If I had a heavier cane, I'd show it to you, because you can't really see it. But when you start cutting your larger canes, you're going to see it. In fact, you can see it right here on this one, but I don't want to cut it off. You'll see that it has an outer area and a softer center. And the rose canes, they die from the center out. So it may look just fine to you, and you'll cut into it, and you'll see that it's occasionally it'll be black in the center. You have to go down until you cut away the black, okay, or the dark brown. I don't know where I was, but in any case, always cut on an angle. Okay? And ideally, this looks not too bad. It's kind of a thin area, but you can, let's see, let me take off the phone. There you go. You can pass that around. You see it's sort of, it's pithy in the center.
Mm-hmm.
Usually more obvious than that, but anyway, always cut away, and if possible, cut away from the crown, because you notice this is sort of starting to take a shape that I want. I want a base shape. I want the sun to be able to get in there. And so if I cut the way I did here, that set of leaves is going to go away from the cane, or away from the crown, sorry. So I don't want to cut to one that's going to go right over the crown. So I try to avoid it. And then I start looking at things that I don't want. And for instance, I don't want this one because it's old and it's not really going to put much out anymore. You see what I meant? It's gray, thorns, it's starting to striate, and you see the growth off of it. It's not much. That's true. And if you prune them properly, if you're lucky, they'll send out new growth. If you're not, it's time to get rid of the rose. If they're not producing, I don't know what it costs for a rose. What are your roses this year?
$12.95 for the Austin's at $16.95, and then the Austin's at $29.95.
There you go. Go ahead.
How old can they live?
Oh, a long time if they're taken really good care of. And that means planting them properly and pruning them properly. If they're really well cared for, they'll go, longer than I'm going to live, or a lot of us are going to live. So, yeah,
I've got
40 years.
I got about 30-year-old roses.
Oh yeah, I've got some that are in my house that are 40 years old, they're still going strong. It depends on the variety, whether it's a good variety in the first place, if you planted it properly in a good location. So anyway, I'm going to get rid of some of these things that we don't need. I'm trying to open up the center. I'm trying to get rid of things that are crossing back into it. You see this one? I don't like it. And it's also coming off of a very old cane. This one, it's this lateral is crossing in front of this one. So how do I get that out of there? Well, if I can't get my shear in, which I can, you can use a pruning saw. I encourage you to use pruning saws to get the stubs off. If you cut down there and you leave behind a ½ inch, it's going to send out all this little blind growth. The blind growth is going to cover the crown, it's going to inhibit air circulation, it's going to increase disease, it's going to take energy away from putting out new canes and blooms. So get one of these. And then you can get rid of, you know, old stubs like this. And they're easy to work. It's just a pole saw. It's easier when it's in the ground. They don't shake so much. There we go. So a good clean cut. And see, here's what I'm talking about when it's dying. You notice, you can really see the soft, chewy center went black. Okay. Kind of a messy. All right. So it's, the more I cut, the better it's looking. And I also said, you know, I want you to try not to cut to an inside bud. Sometimes you have to. I don't like to leave little stubs like this. You see what's happened here? This is a smaller lateral, and off of it are a couple more, and then you get this little stuff that's we call blind growth. And it's easy to see this stuff. You always want to get rid of this. It's like I'll pass it around. Watch the few little thorns on it. But you see, it just comes to a little nut at the top. It's just taking energy away from your roses. So that's the kind of stuff you don't want to keep. So, look for a bud, cut it off. And you see this stub that they left up here? Well, and then they cut straight across. Bam. See if I can get it a little cleaner.
So was this bush trimmed last year or whatever?
How
long has it been like that?
I think it may be fairly new. It looks like it's all new growth to me.
So much of this stuff.
I can't really tell you for sure, but it looks pretty young. I'm going to get rid of this. This is going to show you a little bit. Take it off.
So, Dan,
Yep.
this blind growth you show us, it
Yep.
looks, the reason why I wouldn't chop it off is because at the end of it, it looks like it has a little bud coming out, but you're saying it doesn't? This is.
That little bud coming out is the blind. Nothing will happen with that.
And how do I recognize that as opposed to?
Well, there's a couple of things. You notice the leaf sets are very close to one another.
Uh-huh.
The diameter of the little
Okay.
lateral is very small.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the ability. Here's another one. It's black at the end, and it's just too small to hold
A rose.
bloom. Yeah. So just
All
cut
right.
it off. And you know, when in doubt, cut it out. Yeah, I'm not really attached to them. If you've been pruning roses for, I think I've been doing this close to 60 years. I think, you know, you don't want to think about it too much. You just want to cut. Okay.
Yeah.
You notice it's really starting to take the shape that I'm talking about or hoping for. You know, this one right here is right in the center. It's not ideal, but it's the biggest one. It's the most beautiful one. Don't cut it out.
Why do you take the leaves off if you're going to cut the stem?
I might not cut the stem. I think I might leave it. I want to be able to see what I've got. Now it's done, but I want to fine tune it a little bit. And so I'm looking for other things to cut off because there's plenty of material here. It's not the biggest material, but there's plenty of it. I really like to see, 3 to 5 on a hybrid tea. This is a hybrid tea. 3 to 5 of these canes. And I've got 4, essentially. And then I've got some oddball ones, and I want to keep them because they're going to produce foliage. And the foliage is going to produce more growth because the sun hits the foliage, and through photosynthesis, it's going to produce more growth. So if you cut off, sometimes you're going to look there and you're going to find you're down to 1 cane because the rose bush is, on its way out. So just help it along and just pull it out. Fix the soil, buy a new one, get a new variety that's disease resistant, and you'll be a lot happier with it. There's no reason to keep Christian Dior in your rose garden anymore just because your mom grew it. Well, I grew it too back in 1955.
You used to say shovel prune it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it doesn't bloom enough. It smells wonderful, but it's disease prone. It's not vigorous. We've got roses now that are like, on steroids. Because the hybridizers have been listening to us. The chemicals that we used to have, we don't have anymore, even if you wanted to use them. And so we have to grow roses that are more disease resistant. And Santa Barbara, believe it or not, is the best place in the world, in my opinion, to grow roses. We have the least amount of bugs, and we have the least amount of disease. And the bad diseases we don't have. Everything is kind of controllable. And if you plant in the right spot, you'll reduce that even more. So here, now I'm just going to go around and cut off a few things because I want to get something here. I want to go to a bud eye that's going to go away. This one's got one there, but I think I'm going to shorten this. I don't really like long laterals if I can avoid them, but I wanted to give it some difference in heights. So here we go. I'm keeping these because it's not my rose. At my house, they would go. This one's going to go. Yeah. This one's going. I have my limits. Okay, there we go. There it is.
So where you cut that real low, is another one going to come up?
Maybe. We don't know. The crown is where the best growth comes from. And as the crown gets older, it spreads. And hopefully you continue to get new growth there by getting rid of unnecessary growth. Roses will be like the rest of us. They're lazy if you let them be lazy. So if you don't prune well and you leave too much old stuff, they're going to not bother pressing a new bud from here. If you come up here afterwards, you can see where I've been making my cuts. It's moist, so it means it's a nice healthy crown. And if you prune in the next week or so, before the weather starts warming up, when the weather starts warming up, the bud eyes start to push out. And you don't want to hurt the bud eyes, which happens when you're pruning if you're not careful. So keep an eye out for dormant bud eyes. You can, if it's a really old crown, this is, again, it's young, but you'll find if you get an old one, you're going to find that the crown area starts to get kind of flaky looking, you know what I mean? Where this stuff will come off. Let's see. It's just loose. And you can take, you can do this if you want, or you can take a barbecue brush, you know, one of those wire barbecue brushes. You can take those and just scratch your crown. Don't scratch off your bud eyes. Bud eyes are easy to spot. They're going to start out deep, dark red. So wear your glasses when you're pruning. You should do that anyway because you want to protect your eyes, protect your, get a pair of opera-length gloves to prune with. You want to protect your hands and arms. Make sure you've had your tetanus shot. And don't use chemicals. That'll help you. Anyway, I'm just doing a little housekeeping in here. It's really important to start out with a good, clean area. Now, does anybody have any questions about pruning? Okay. Go ahead.
I would, the one on your right hand, there's two of them there, and the one inside it, I would take that one out because they're going to cross over each other.
Yeah, sure. I really wanted to take this one off because
It's older.
it's really old. This is small. I mean, I'm trying to have a little bit of balance here, but frankly, I should take the whole thing off. I should take this off too, and just stop with these four right here. That's what you should have.
And normally I would cut where below any junction, like the tall one there, I'd cut below it.
This one?
Yeah.
No, because I don't want to cut that short. This is a hybrid tea. Here's something that's really important, and this is the question you asked. Roses are not pruned all the same. If you have a tall rose, and this is a tall rose, Sugar Moon in your garden is going to be very tall. If you cut it down, it's going to spend all its time getting back up. My perfect example is Queen Elizabeth. It was my first rose when it first came out in 1954. And Queen Elizabeth, a lot of people may still have. It's a grandiflora. It's very tall. If you cut it down, it's going to spend all of its time trying to get back up. And if you keep cutting it down, eventually it's going to give up. So if you have tall roses, for instance, my very favorite new variety right now is called Francis Mayond. It's got everything I want in a rose. It's a huge, voluptuous, porcelain pink blossom that's very, very fragrant, and it has no disease. But it's tall. So if you cut that rose down, it's going to spend all its time trying to get back up. And it's a waste of a lot of time. So look at your roses before you start pruning them. If your rose, and if they're short because they're in bad condition, pull it out and get a new one. If they're short because the variety is short, for instance, the peace rose, it's a very short variety. It stays down here. So you're not going to be able to get it up tall. And you can tell by how long your canes are. The canes on this variety normally would be 3, 4, or 5 feet in length without a break if they're in the ground. Okay? This is a potted rose, and it's still young. But you're going to have roses, you're going to look at them, and if you want to practice, we can use your help at the AC Postel Garden next Saturday morning. And you can look at all different varieties, and you see what I'm talking about.
Where's that at?
At the AC Postel Memorial Rose Garden across from the Mission.
When, Saturday?
Next Saturday,
What time?
8 o'clock. And I'll be talking about pruning roses again. But you're welcome to come out and practice on theirs before you practice on your own. So you'll get these very, very, very long canes. Well, you don't want to bring them down. But if you have a variety that's all the canes are 1.5 foot long, well, that's the best you can do, because then you start getting too many laterals. And on a hybrid tea, I don't like too many laterals. This is a cane, and I've got 2 laterals on here.
So is everybody supposed to have their roses look like that right now?
Well, they will after they're pruned.
Well, I mean, like, I only have the Santa Barbara, the iceberg.
Iceberg is a Floribunda, and that's a different kind of rose, and I'll talk about that in just a second. So, this one is as finished as it's going to get. when you're finished with it, you notice how clean it is underneath? Make sure you keep the area around your roses clean when you're done, because you're gonna dormant spray. Okay? You're gonna use oil and copper fungicide. They're both organic materials, they're both safe. You mix them together by the directions on the bottles, and spray right after you finish pruning the area around the rose and the entire plant. And then if you can, I would suggest you do it again a week later. If it's gonna rain the next day, don't do it. You have to do it when you're gonna have a couple of days so it can completely dry and work. Good. Go ahead.
So I have a rose that has a lot of leaves that are being like eaten,
Sure.
like holes all over the leaves, but only in one part of the rose bush.
Well, you're gonna be taking all the leaves off,
Right.
so you won't have those anymore. And the two sprays that I'm talking about putting together, they take care of everything.
Got it.
The oil is going to smother the bugs and the eggs. And the copper is going to kill spores and fungus. So you're going to start out completely clean. Okay? So you don't have to worry about any of that. You had a question?
Yeah, I was curious, I have a rose that's a climber, and it seems like all the new growth is coming out of the old, crown, and so, how do I prune it?
It's the new growth is coming off the crown.
Well, it's coming off old wood.
Oh, it's coming off of old
Very
wood.
old, gray, looks dead, but all the new growth's coming off all this dead stuff, so.
Sure.
What do I do with that?
Well, is it an old climber?
Well, it's not that old, but it looks like it. Maybe it's just.
Well,
It's like 10 years maybe.
sure, that's not very old for a climber. Climbers are a sort of a different animal. If you think about a hybrid tea, a climber is a hybrid tea that's gone crazy. So this cane, instead of being 3 or 4 feet long, and before I forget, hybrid teas, you want your canes to be about 3 foot long when you're finished. Okay, and that's canes without breaks. Okay, that's an average. Climbers, they're going to be 10 or 12 foot long without a break. Because when the new growth comes from the ground, if it's a healthy climber, it comes from the ground, it's going to go all the way to the end and then bloom only on the end. And then the next time, just like here, all of these buds, they're going to shoot out blooms. This bloom only at the tops, right? Remember the buds that were all at the top? Well, now it's going to send out a bud here, and that's going to have blooms on it. And then you could get one here and here. Every place you see a bud has the potential for blooms. So the climbers, if you have a 10 or 12 foot cane, you want to cut off 10 or 15% of that at the end where it has already bloomed, until you have a decent diameter cane. So you want to cut off stuff that looks like that. But when it gets to look like that, you're at the place where it's got potential. What happens with climbers is that these canes, if you're growing them properly, you've got them going as horizontal as possible. Makes no sense because you want to grow them up, but you have to get them over for them to bloom. When they go grow them horizontally, like on a fence or on the side of a wall, when they get that horizontal position, the sun hits those bud eyes and the new growth comes out off of all of them. So when you have a cane, a climbing cane, you have to have laterals for more blooms. That's the difference. So you'll have these, if this is growing, let's see if we can get one. Here's a decent one. Okay. This is now a climbing cane. You see I'm taking off all these sets of leaves. Every one of those bright spots, the sun hits it, it's going to send out a lateral. And the next year, you don't cut all those laterals off. You cut them down to 3 or 4 butt eyes. Excuse me. Let's see if I can turn this on. My gloves won't let me, sir. There we go. Okay, that's funny. Feel like Donald Trump. Okay. Anyway, did that make sense? Leaving laterals all along the length of the cane?
But the fact that the new growth is coming out of old dead wood
That
is
old dead wood, it's not dead if it's sending out new growth. Okay. The canes, they're gonna get, like all of these, the canes on the primer are gonna get gray and look dead. And you have to remove some of them to allow for new ones. So that's climbers. Floribundas, icebergs. Everybody's got icebergs.
I need to roll your eyes.
Iceberg is the #1 selling rose in the country because people don't buy one, they buy 12. And just because it's the most boring rose I can imagine. Anyway,
Now, that's not nice.
I have my biases.
Well, do you prune, like, I've been pruning mine now because it looks,
Sure. You want, actually, they've got one right out here that's pruned. You leave a lot more material on any Floribunda than you do on a hybrid tea. You bring them a little bit lower, unless it's a tall Floribunda. If you have hot cocoa, for instance, it's an 8-foot Floribunda. It resents it if you bring it down. So read your Floribundas. But if you have an iceberg, you want it to be more compact. And if you're not bringing that rose down, you'll find what iceberg always does, it gets ugly feet. Really ugly feet. You'll find that it gets gray at the base and it won't produce any foliage. So what you do is you're walking along the pathway of all these icebergs and they've got this much gray at the base and then it's green on top. So you grow things in front of them.
well, you know, but they have them all around Costco and they always look nice, they never prune.
Sure.
They never
Well,
prune them.
Are they?
Oh, they do.
They probably
They take
do.
a hedge clippers and they.
Yeah, they probably hedge prune. And that's fine too. Anyway, you have to prune your icebergs, just leave, and Floribundas, just leave more. I'm saying here 5, 7, you can use 7, 9, 12, as long as they're healthy and they're heavy, leave them. And then on icebergs, particularly, you leave 2nd and 3rd laterals, lots of them, because you're growing that rose for bloom, not, it's a landscape plant. You're growing it for that landscape potential. You're not growing it just because you want to take one in the house, because nobody cuts iceberg.
Well, do you kind of prune them all year?
Do you prune them all year?
Well,
No, you
They
can,
get kind of crazy.
yeah, you shape them all year.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody have any more questions about pruning? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, you did ask. Go. She was first.
If that were your rose, would you cut off some of those
I would
small-
cut off this whole thing because
Yeah.
it's old and all these are small.
Right.
In fact, you know, people do this to me every year. I'm trying to be a nice guy and I just can't. So I'm gonna just cut a little bit more. Does that make you happier? Yeah, I still would rather cut this whole thing off, this one off, and this one off, and just leave these 4. But it looks unbalanced to me. I don't care. The new growth will come out from this side.
And another question we have, on a smaller rose that doesn't typically get tall, would you cut the laterals and just leave a sturdy cane?
It depends how long the cane is.
Yeah, okay.
I can't,
don't want a little
you know, it's
stubby
hard for
thing.
me to say. You know, if you've got a long cane, we'll say it's this long without a break, cut it anywhere you want. But if it's, you know, if it's short, I want the length, so leave some laterals.
I was always under the understanding that you cut back the laterals and just leave the sturdy canes.
You know, we're in Santa Barbara.
And I'm on the mesa.
Right. In the old days, we used to just leave 3 canes without laterals. Well, we don't do that anymore because we're greedy. We've learned that the more you leave, the more flower you get. So your roses are going to bloom off the laterals. The only time they bloom off the canes is when they first come out. You saw how this was. All those canes had a bloom at the top. Next time they bloom off laterals. Young man.
2 questions. One, speaking of deadwood and unbalanced roses, I've got one that's very much on one side, deadwood over here, appears to be, and quite substantial. I mean, maybe that big around. If I score that, am I likely to get some new growth out of that?
If it's dead, it's dead. Just cut it off. If it's alive, and it's not sending out growth, it could be that it's not getting enough sun, it's on the wrong side of the bush, you know, it's hard to say.
But cut it off even if it's that big around, just...
If it's dead, there's no reason to keep it.
Of course, yeah. Also then, got some climbers that are just made up of foliage and suckers. You get occasional blooms out at the end. Do I need to just strip them down and start over again?
Well, you know, if you're attached to the rose, sure, just dig it out and buy a new one.
Okay.
And it could be the location, it could be what it's planted in, it could be how old it is. You know, there's a number of reasons roses deteriorate. Unless I see it, it's hard for me to say, but I don't get attached to them. I got over that a long time ago. You know, I've been growing roses a long time. And I went through the phase where I had to have whole